So, of course, the Tirobhava, or the disappearance of Prabhupada from mortal vision, is considered to be an auspicious event, but it's at the same time kind of a bittersweet one, if you will. And to reflect back on the actual occasion, the events surrounding that, that's where my mind goes at the thought of his disappearance this morning. And I was with Prabhupada prior to that date, about a month or so prior to that. I had been there with him in Vrindavan, and one morning, it was either late September or early October, I was massaging his feet, and he said, "You're a very intelligent boy. You should go back to America and preach." I had kind of camped out there, as a number of us had, in his company in Vrindavan to be with him in times that it appeared might be close to his disappearance, although it's not something that many of us really entertained or embraced, or certainly didn't digest that possibility. There were other occasions that Prabhupada had fallen ill and so forth, and he healed from them and returned to his vibrant campaign. So his life itself was very miraculous. So we were, without thinking about it, we were kind of just implicitly kind of programmed, at least I was, to think, of course, he's going to rebound from this. And I was 28 years old, so it was about close to half a century ago. That's a long time ago to think of myself as a 28-year-old young man. But he said to me, "You're a very intelligent boy. You should go back to America and preach." So I took that to mean that don't worry about me here, go and preach. He had told me previously in Mayapur, during the Mayapur festival, which was about 6 months earlier, at which time he had started to enter into what turned out to be the passing phase of his life, and he was not disposed physically to come to and give classes in Mayapur as he would annually, and others were giving classes under his direction and so forth. So the system at the time was that we would spend a month in Vrindavan or in Mayapur with Prabhupada for 2 weeks, I think it was, and then go to Vrindavan for 2 weeks. So the festival, annual festival, shifted between the two dhams. And so as the days approached for us to depart and go to Vrindavan, there was some question whether Prabhupada would accompany us to Vrindavan. He was too ill to give a class, in his own estimation, which, as I think about it now, would have been considerable, because he was quite driven, to speak about Krishna and to address his international, audience of students on that occasion of the Mayapur festival. Would have been, further impetus for something that he was very much inclined to do anyway. But I went to him and spoke to him privately on his veranda, and told him that I was not planning on going to the Vrindavan part of the festival. And he said, "Why not?" It was like obvious to me, but in his innocence, he said, "Why not?" And I said, "Well, because you are the festival and you're not going to go there." He seemed to like that, and then he spoke to me about how he always felt the presence of his Guru Maharaj. Spoke a little bit about power of Bhagavad Gita and Krishna's presence in his words, even in his apparent absence. And then he addressed the name that he had given me, Tripurari, and explained further its meaning as it appears in the eighth canto of the Bhagavatam, seventh or eighth canto of the Bhagavatam. A name for Lord Shiva, who was empowered by Krishna to deal with demonic influences in the world, and of course was successful as a result of that empowerment. So he told me that it was my service to follow that kind of example, and through preaching to expose the demonic conceptions and so on and so forth. And so he said, you should go, and where I will be there with you wherever you are preaching. So here he was in Vrindavan, just about a month or 5 or 6 weeks before his passing, telling me the same thing without me asking him anything. But there I was, staying with him on the basis of the same thinking that caused me to tell him in Mayapur 6 months earlier that I wasn't going to the festival. At which time, again, he said, no, you should go to the festival and represent me and preach to the devotees and so on and so forth. So, without my asking, but thinking a little bit about it while massaging his feet, he said to me, you're an intelligent boy, so you should go back and preach. So I went back, and I also, I thought from that, well, this is maybe further indication that he is, going to rebound and so forth. And I was there to see out the end of his Leela, if you will. It seemed like it wasn't going to end from his words, so I departed at his suggestion, if not order, and went back to the United States to continue my service there. At that time, however, he was already expressing a desire to go to Govardhan Parikrama, which would have been very difficult for him physically, but he had such a strong desire to do that he repeatedly was expressing that. And this, of course, was also in the midst of his final commentary on Srimad Bhagavatam, which ended with the end of the 13th chapter of the 10th canto, which is the chapter that kind of prelude to the Brahma Vimohan Leela. It's included within the chapters that constitute the Brahma Vimohan Leela. And to me, that was very telling. Being in Vrindavan, he was longing to go to Govardhan and to Govardhan Parikrama with Govardhan Puja approaching. The way they set up the calendar is that these days is that an event like Govardhan Puja is calculated differently than the day of Prabhupada's disappearance. So the calculation that gives us the date for Govardhan Puja and other similar holidays or holy days commemorating Krishna's Leela or whatnot, Gaur Leela, they change annually from year to year on our present-day calendar, but they chose not to do that with Prabhupada's disappearance, so it's a fixed day, which is, I guess, today. I hope I'm right about that, but I think so. And so, anyway, at the time, even before I left, my point is that Govardhan Puja was approaching, and he was very bent on going. There was a debate amongst his senior disciples as to whether to let him go or whatever the spiritual master wants to do. We should go with that, or we should weigh in more humanly and discourage him from going based on the doctor's recommendations and so forth, who had said, the Ayurvedic doctor who had said that it would be detrimental, very detrimental to his health. So ultimately he acquiesced to the more human, sweeter kind of perspective in the more Aishvarya, majestic perspective on the Guru. He acquiesced to the more human perspective and didn't go, but he longed to, and he was still dictating somehow or other his commentary on the Bhagavatam, which again was in the 13th chapter, which ended, I think, with the last verse of the 13th chapter. At that point, if you will, his Brihat Mridanga, the campaign. Brihat Mridanga, of course, is a term coined by Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, referred to the book publication and circulation, wide distribution of the dispensation of Mahaprabhu that extended, that had the capacity to extend beyond the distance that kirtan, in its traditional sense, chanting in the public, could extend. The idea being that through publishing and whatnot, that sound, the implications of kirtan could go all over the world. So that was his, what I refer to here as his Brihat Mridanga, campaign, which was considerable. Here he was in Vrindavan, where his initial outreach to us and the whole world really began. It was there that he was living, there that he retired, there that he was inspired to accept a renounced order and made efforts to acquire the necessary documents to go to the Western world and so forth, where it had been suggested by his Guru Bhaktisiddhanta that he go, or to Westerners that he share Mahaprabhu's dispensation in the English language. Prabhupada Bhaktisiddhanta suggested that to him, and in that he took it. Prabhupada Bhaktivedanta Swami took it as his order. So there he was back in Vrindavan, if you will, where his campaign began, and he's in the midst of his commentary on the Brahma Vimohan Leela. He kind of lived really in his commentaries and came out of them to manage the movement, and tried not to come out of them by way of establishing a governing body that would do the management for him. Inept as that body was at times, he had to come out from that inner absorption and deal with worldly and everyday, dealings that arise inevitably in a mission like the one he had, consisting of many persons, many men and women, and opening temples and so forth and so on. So there, he wasn't doing any management, if you will, and he was kind of in the final portion of his commentary. So internally absorbed in that, and from that internal absorption, expressing a desire to go to Govardhan and the Govardhan Leela was coming and so forth. So this is where he was, so to speak, at the time that his Brihat Mridanga was silenced. And of course, it wasn't silenced by any external influence. Nothing could get in the way of his voice. He had a response to everything, every argument. A lot of it was like spiritual common sense, witticisms of a few words or a sentence or two that turned our heads and convinced us that the direction in which he was taking us was the one to go. So there was nothing from outside that could silence him, nothing that would have that went wrong within his mission, which at times things like that happened. There were problems in the mission. No, that slowed him down, stopped him. In fact, when he formed the mission of ISKCON, the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, and signed the paperwork in New York for the forming of the corporation, he said at the time, so now we're forming this corporation, but if it should get in the way of the spreading of Mahaprabhu's dispensation, then we will reject it and, start another one or start anew. Very prophetic statement. I think it was, in that he must have been drawing on things that were expressed to him by Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada himself about the pitfalls of institutions, their virtues and their possible problems that could arise within an institutionalization of the teachings formed to make it more accessible, the teaching, but more prone in that form, the teachings institutionalized to some form of corruption or distortion. So he must have, Bhaktisiddhanta expressed that to him at Radhakund. He had made with great effort he had established the Bhag Bazaar Math, which was perhaps the first temple that he formed outside of the Dham, outside of Mayapur, where all the Siddhas, Babas were staying, and to go to Calcutta was unheard of. But he went there and established a temple and so forth, and it was a pretty lavish arrangement, marble temple and so forth. A lot of money was raised for it and so on. But he expressed to Prabhupada at Radhakund that in his mid-60s, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, that we've gone to great trouble to establish this building, and people are fighting over which room they should have based on their sense of where they are in the pecking order, and so he was displeased with that, obviously, and he told Prabhupada, if you ever get money, print books, we can sell the marbles, he said. Sell the marbles, and print books. So it's something that Prabhupada imbibed, and although he established many temples and so forth, he seemed to reflect upon that instruction at the time of forming the institution of ISKCON, which was a great institution and was a great effort on his part, and had problems even in his presence, but they didn't get in the way, in my point, of his outreach. No matter what happened during the day, during our waking hours, he was up at night recording through his dictaphone his Bhagavatam commentary. I remember once I was staying in Vrindavan for Krishna Balaram Mandir, and I happened to get a bed in a room in which there was a window that viewed Prabhupada's veranda. Prabhupada's room had a upstairs veranda where sometimes he would go and sit, and in the night, during the hotter days in Vrindavan, he would sit up there and translate. After we would take rest, say 10 o'clock or so, he would stay up for several hours. So, staying in that room, and I awoke in the night to answer the call of nature, and upon returning to my bed, I looked through the window, and there I could see Prabhupada on his veranda, translating the Bhagavatam. I mean, I knew that he was doing that, but to see him there doing that, and everywhere the lights out and everyone is asleep and so forth, was very inspiring to me. And so it's just illustrating, underscoring this point. Whatever happened during the day, and a lot of things happened. There were problems, and there were things to celebrate as well. Whether they were ups or downs in the course of the day, he remained consistent and steady and unrelenting, or unstoppable, if you will, in his literary work, in playing his big mridanga, the Brihat mridanga. Takes a lot of composure and a lot of deep standing in bhakti. So there he would be at night while we were asleep, continuing his translation of the Bhagavatam. So there was no point here. There was no external force that silenced his Brihat Mridanga. But there he was, if you can imagine, in Vrindavan, contemplating the Govardhan Leela and the Brahma Vimohan Leela. Brahma Vimohan Leela being where he was absorbed in his writing, and the Govardhan Leela approaching the time to commemorate that. This is during the Kartik month in Vrindavan, a very celebratory month, and that's where he was really dwelling. And in the midst of that, his drum, if you will, was silenced. Again, not by any external influence, but by the blessing of Krishna, who was inviting him to lunch. There, he had a painting placed in his room. I believe it was somewhere else, and he asked for it to be placed there. And that was a famous painting. I don't know which of his disciples did that, but of Krishna taking lunch with his cowherd friends. The picture in particular depicts the Brahma Vimohan Leela, which has preceded the actual appearance of Brahma by Krishna's lunching with his friends, and the uncommon appearance, if you will, of Krishna, who was Brahma's guru, who previously he saw at the dawn of creation with the Gyan Mudra, looking very Upanishadic, although dressed as a Gopa nonetheless. Here he was with rice and fruit mixed together in his left hand with his friends, in a very intimate setting. And it was a setting, so Prabhupada wanted that picture there, and it was a setting that Prabhupada at other times expressed identification with and a longing to enter into. So we can say definitively, by a careful study of his own statements about his inner life and other things that he did, such as having that painting placed there and so forth, that his mridanga was silenced not by any external force, but by the blessing of Krishna, inviting him to lunch once and for all, if you will. So, in this bhava that he was absorbed in was obviously that longing was a longing that was very well deserved and arose out of, as Baba really does, actual Baba, out of Shraddha and wholesale Sharanagati. His surrender was not partial but wholesale. And that Shraddha and Sharanagati, that's the focus, if you will, of sadhana bhakti, which gives birth to bhava bhakti, which is focus of which is characterized by this kind of longing. So longing, there may be some longing inside of the bhakti, but the longing is what Bhava Bhakti is characterized by, whereas at which time Shraddha and Sharanagati are, very much in place. The theatrical stage of Sharanagati, in which the drama of Krishna Lila is enacted, is already erected at that time. So prior to Bhava, we are a little bit busy with building the stage of Shraddha and Sharanagati, strengthening the Shraddha, building the stage of Sharanagati. Sharanagati being the external expression of Shraddha, or internal faith. So that Shraddha Sharanagati, this is the focus of sadhana bhakti, and the excessive longing that is not, in which one is unconcerned, if you will, with developing the stage of Sharanagati through one's, which show or demonstrate the measure of one's faith. That's not what we call real bhava. So his bhava is real, if you will. This is one of the objective ways by which we can understand that. We look at the measure of his Shraddha and Sharanagati, and it is extreme. The measure of his surrender, as he expresses in his poem on the Jaladuta, for example. There, incidentally, in that poem, famous poem, the first half of the poem is all about Sharanagati. The second half of the poem is all about the lolyam, longing in bhava, and they're longing for Sakiras. Tomar milane bhai abar she shukupai kocharani guri din por ottovani tyuto juti bani kai lutobuti she din kove hove more. Din kove hove more. He prays. So here his prayers are answered. Krishna has invited him to lunch in his Mridanga silence. He's spoken so sweetly and such conviction and so widely about the secrets of the Vrindavan Leela that it's a little bit embarrassing to Krishna. You know that about me? So Krishna's put his hand over his mouth now, silenced him, and brought him within his midst, inviting him to that luncheon that he at times voiced a longing to enter into, and to eat ladus and kachoris with Krishna. So we should pray on a day like this that we might have some measure of our Shraddha and Sharanagati will grow to the extent that it will actually give birth to bhava and the open arms of Krishna and his entourage, the Swarup Shakti, inviting us into the Leela in a manner that corresponds with our bhajan here in the case of Sakirasa. Then we want to join in that luncheon. Not that gopis don't want to. They also want to join that lunch, but they can't by the nature of the Leela, which is that inability, of course, augments their parakiya and makes it as special as it is. So a very special occasion, Prabhupada's disappearance. I wasn't there personally because, again, he had sent me back, if you will, to continue my service in the United States. But there he passed. Must have been just after, some days that year, or maybe a week or two, even after Govardhan Puja, and word was sent out, around the world. I was in St. Louis at the time. We had a little shoebox or a house There was a temple that was next in line on the block to be demolished by the city, who was going to give us money for it at their price. We could purchase another building. So it was a shabby old place. What I'm reminded of at the time, and just in thinking about it at the moment, is that I announced that it was told to me I was the leader. We had about 60 brahmacharis there. I had announced it to the devotees, and we had a commemoration ceremony. There was a feast and all. And that's the feast of a godbrother of mine named Suradas. Some of you may know him. He sat before the Swami Prabhupada and played the harmonium and sang, and he had a very hoarse, kind of a deep but very sweet voice, and he sang in glorification of Prabhupada in a way that was very, very moving. He was very moved by that. I remember him always for that. It was very, very touching. It was again 60 or so of us. I hope you're there. I've been talking for a long time. Hope you can hear me.
Yeah, you're good.
It was a very Prabhupada's disappearing from the world. Not everybody kind of understood it. Not everybody felt it exactly the same way. And Sura was sitting after the feast, which, it was turned into a little bit of a lighthearted scene, as I recall it, which didn't seem entirely appropriate to me. To go up where it was upstairs or where it was in the next room and see him playing that, to me it spoke to my own feelings on the occasion of his disappearance, which then in Vrindavan was commemorated. I don't want to say celebrated or whatever, or dealt with appropriately. Bhaktivedanta Maharaj had been requested previously to come and oversee that procedures of the samadhi, something that we didn't know anything about. He was the officiating priest for Prabhupada's sannyas, which he received from Bhakti Pragyan Keshav Maharaj, the guru of Bhaktivedanta Narayan Maharaj. And Prabhupada was taken, his form was taken through the streets of Vrindavan. And everything in Vrindavan stopped on that day. Every shopkeeper, every man, woman, and child who came to the street to see him, the final darshan of Prabhupada, who had brought Vrindavan to the world and brought the world to Vrindavan. It was just an amazing feat, amazing accomplishment. He brought Vrindavan to the world, who had heard of it, in a way that's similar to how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu had commissioned Rupa and Sanatan to reestablish or resurrect the places of Krishna's pastimes. They did that through their vision, through their bhava, and they secured the patronage of the royalty at the time, who would then give from their treasuries the money to commission architects and builders to make a ghat, to make a temple, to commemorate the vision of the Goswamis. Krishna did this here, Krishna did this there, and so forth. So they put it really on the map when Mahaprabhu Chaitanya Dev went to Vrindavan, as he longed to do repeatedly from the time of taking sannyas. When he did manage to make the journey there, he found Radhakund and Shamkund, and they weren't understood as such by the people. So then to have the Goswamis do the work of further excavating the places of Krishna's pastimes, gaining as they did the patronage of the kings, and so the places like Radhakund and Shamkund were built up, and so on and so forth. So they revealed to the world Vrindavan. They gave Vrindavan, to the world, and it was the center, really, of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So in a way that's analogous, different, but analogous nonetheless, Prabhupada gave Vrindavan to a larger world, celebrating it, building its Krishna Balaram temple, which was from where he passed, where he put Krishna Balaram, his Ishtadevata, on the central altar, with the flags above all three altars. That was the tallest flag, Krishna Balaram's flag. At the time, it was a forest, and Prabhupada got a donation of the land. It was a dangerous place comparatively to the city or the town of Vrindavan itself. But it drew many pilgrims. Ultimately, many devotees from all over the world, international devotees. They came to the world. The building of the temple symbolized the acceptance in Vrindavan of the international community of the students. Many dignified people came and spoke. Some Brahmin boys born in Braj were initiated by him. That was a big thing, and so forth. So he brought the world to Vrindavan in that sense, and we had a lot of money. United States, Europe, these countries, Canada, and so they were wealthy compared to India. So they would come from Kishore Kishori's temple, from Radha Govinda's temple in Chicago, New York, from temples from all over North America, Radha Ishwar, and so forth. And the temple presence would come with bags of money to spend on their deity, outfits and silver crowns and so forth. So they were bringing a lot of economy, I want to say, to the Vrindavan merchants. Loy Bazaar was, it's a place for cloth, for wool, Loy Bazaar. But there were a couple of merchants who had mukutwalas who sold deity crowns and made outfits and so forth, and they became prominent in Loy Bazaar because that was the closest bazaar to the Krishna Balaram Mandir. So they and it's the rest of Vrindavan also. The world came there in the form of its material wealth and so forth, and well-being, materially speaking, of the inhabitants of Vrindavan was seen to and increased, facilitated by Prabhupada, while at the same time facilitating our spiritual life and the spiritual life of the inhabitants of Vrindavan who could pay attention and look deeper as to what he was offering. But it's interesting to note that both materially and spiritually he was benefiting at the same time. So when he was taken through the streets on the palanquin, his transcendental form for the final darshan, accompanied by some kirtan, every shop stopped, the clock stopped in the Vrindavan. Everyone lined the streets. I wasn't there, but the stories are there, some pictures are there, and you can imagine from what I'm saying what Prabhupada meant to them. They named shortly, before that, I think at the time of, would have been 1975, the time of opening of the Krishna Balaram Temple, the road from Delhi, turn off from the road to Delhi that goes into Vrindavan, was renamed Bhaktivedanta Swami Marg, the path to Vrindavan. I remember there was a fellow who was actually from the Advaitin Sampradaya, but converted to Gaudiya Vaishnavism, but he was not very much in line with the Goswami's teachings and not deeply informed on that. And he knew Chaitanya Goswami from the Radharaman Goswami family from previous times. And so he, having been converted to Gaudiya Vaishnavism, he came to Vrindavan and he looked up Chaitanya Goswami and he asked Chaitanya Goswami to come to America where he had been preaching and preach, Gaudiya Siddhanta, which he was not that informed about. It's kind of odd that he was converted, but it's a long story. Anyway, Chaitanya Goswami told me the story. I knew the fellow. I didn't know him personally, but I knew of his preaching and so forth. And told me that he had been invited and he went and so forth. And he said the man has no understanding of Gaudiya Vaishnavism. He's living on his good karma and he's expiring it because he got lots of money. And so he told me that he criticized on one occasion Prabhupada, and Chaitanya Goswami told me that I was quick to silence him. I told him, you cannot enter Vrindavan without thinking like that about Swamiji Prabhupada. That is not possible. He's the road to Vrindavan. He was making the point in a deeper sense. I very much appreciated it. So this was a condition at the time of his departure, and Vrindavan was a lot simpler then, much less developed materially and less populated and more quaint and family-like, if you will. Shop owners inviting people, presidents and sannyasis to their houses for lunch, hoping to get their patronage and so forth, but also inspired by them and by the Prabhupada Ji, Swamiji. So it's a very memorable occasion. His passing. It reminds me of how the passing of Sanatana Goswami in Vrindavan is spoken of, how everything stopped. Villagers from all over the Braj, not just in the Vrindavan, came out, and every man, woman, and child shaved their head because Sanatana used to keep his head shaved. He's called Munda Baba, shaved-headed Baba. They all shaved their heads as a way of saying, that we have our allegiance to him, the elder of the six Goswamis, guru figure in the life of Rupa Goswami, etc. And they also, Sanatana, they used to deal with the practical, everyday problems of people to some extent, would bring to them an argument between two for a resolution, and whatever the Goswamis spoke kindly, bringing themselves down from their internal life to deal with that was agreed upon. And so Dira Jana Priya Priya Karo. So they're described by Srinivas. Similarly, Srila Prabhupada, in a way, as I'm saying, he was very much loved, even on a base level, for what he did for the people of Vrindavan, and they could understand what he was doing in a larger sense for the Vrindavan that they were connected to by their birth, which is their heritage, the ideal of Srimad Bhagavatam, and so forth, and seeing it alive in the eyes that reflected the hearts of his excited disciples was very endearing to them. They made real friendships. I'm thinking back of some of the Mukutwalas and Tulsiwalas and so forth. They made real friendships with some of the warriors. Now their sons and grandsons are sitting in those shops and so forth. And what this moment was in time of Prabhupada's passing, what it must have meant to them is maybe a little lost, and therefore it's a need annually for this kind of commemoration of Prabhupada's disappearance. That some persons who were personally known to him and served him, saw him with their eyes, felt him, his friendship, their hearts, would speak on such occasions and share with us his, now he has grandchildren. What such a wonderful thing. Share with them something about significance of his campaign. It's talked about, of course, all the time, but different persons in different ways and so forth. But these are a few of my thoughts on this occasion. Srila Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada Ki Jai. I didn't plan to give a whole lecture on this, but here I have. But I'll still take some questions if anyone has any questions. We'll extend the discussion.
Would you like the questions to be, Raj, would you want the questions to be directly about the talk today?
Well, if there are any about the talk today, first we'll take those. And if there are others beyond that, then we'll take them. So
I actually
if anyone
have
has any questions.
Yeah,
yes,
I have a question.
Forgive me.
Gurmaraj, can you hear me? Yes, I have a question from the talk today. When you were talking about the two perspectives of taking Srila Prabhupada on parikrama around Govardhan, and you called one Aishvarya and one more human, which perspective? Madhurya. Yeah, okay. So which perspective did you endorse at that time?
At that time, I was not directly involved in the discussion. The discussion was going on amongst Prabhupada's servant and, a couple of GBC members who were, organizers, managers, and whatnot, and the doctor. It wasn't like a vote or, a popular, what do you think? Let's take a vote. It wasn't that everybody was included in the discussion. Everybody knew the discussion was going on. I was not, I would say I was not as privy to the physical details, doctor's report, and so forth. So I suppose I was a little inclined towards, let's go on the park run. I didn't at the time look at it as a majestic perspective the way I was looking at that. So that's kind of a third perspective that maybe I could say was mine. I thought, that I don't know how to explain it, but I'm just kind of trying to remember it. And it seemed to pass rather quickly. So, but I kind of remember thinking I'd like to go on that park run with Prabhupada around Vrindavan. Krishna will protect them. Here he is. He's a cowherd. This is what Krishna does. So the cowherds they tend to take what would appear to be a risk. Like you take the Brahma Vimohan Leela preceded by the Agasura Leela, which was included in it, as I mentioned, that there they wanted to, enter into Agasura's mouth. Some of them even knew that it was a serpent, and they thought, well, Krishna will protect us. So I kind of had that kind of a perspective. I think it was more Madhurya-like in in a different way, rather than it's the order of the spiritual master, whatever he says we should do. That's what I'm talking about, kind of Madhurya, and then the other one is no, we should tender to the self, and the third one being more of a progressive perspective. That's how I thought about it. Does that help?
Yes, that's like, because I remember being very moved by both sides at the time, and I'd hear one side and I'd think, yeah, that sounds right, and then I'd hear the other side, and so it was,
right.
It was hard. It was hard to really know at that time, so I was curious to hear what your thoughts were. So, anybody else? Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. Yeah. Next question.
Yeah. Does anybody else have a question from the talk today? You do. Unmute yourself if you can. So we have a few questions from that people had submitted earlier. Do you want to take some of those, Gumaraj?
Sure.
Okay. I'm going to start with the Brighton devotees. Amrita Gopaldasi has a question.
Okay.
Hello. Yes.
Hare Krishna, Gumaraj. This is Mohini Dasi. We're here with Madan Mohan and our friend Amrita Gopal Dasi. She would like to ask a question.
Okay.
So I'll hand it over to her. Hare Krishna, devotees, Hare Krishna Maharaj. Thank you so much for speaking so wonderfully about Srila Prabhupada's disappearance. It was wonderful to hear you talk about your experience and also the auspiciousness of the day coupled with the bittersweetness. So thank you again. And also I want to say about your disciples, Mohini and Madan Mohan, they are just wonderful and they're representing you so beautifully there in Brighton. So thank you very much for training them so wonderfully. My question relates to Sri Raghunath Das Goswami's Sri Govardhan Bas Pratana Ashtakam. And in that Ashtakam, Raghunath Das Goswami speaks about the rasa that Govardhan has for Sri Krishna, that sweetness in Shankyaras. And I would like to know more about the characteristics and flavor of that rasa. And I would also like to know how that rasa, how its rays, if you like, how its flavor influences those who take shelter of Govardhan. Thank you.
Sakyarasa. You want to know something about Sakyarasa? Is that the question?
Specifically, pardon me for interrupting, specifically how Govardhan manifests his Sakyaras, how that mellow influences his love for Krishna.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yes. So, yes, Raghunath Das has made that connection. Later, Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur has also commented in that regard. And we have a famous verse from the Venu Gita of the Bhagavatam where the gopis are speaking about the power and influence of Krishna's flute. And in those, in that chapter, the voice of Radha, in the estimation of our foundational commentators, is expressed with regard to the glorification of Govardhan. So Radharani sings the praise of Govardhan in the context of glorifying or speaking about the effects of Krishna's flute, and she refers therein to Govardhan, as you may know, as Haridas Varya, the best of the servants of Haridas. When we then take that and combine it together with the idea of Govardhan in Sakyarasa, and we look at how Raghunath Das Goswami in his work and Jiva Goswami in his writings in Gopal Champu, for example, have played out that idea, Haridasvarya, all the ways, if you will, in which Govardhan serves. We also find it in Rupa Goswami's Dhamakeli Lila, where through the voice of Brinda Devi, Govardhan is glorified. Therein, Govardhan is glorified. Govardhan, is a hill that has many peaks. It's very horizontally wide, with a number of peaks rather than just two vertical edges going to a zenith. So Brinda Devi reflects on the virtues, the glories of Govardhan, and compares him to, it says, he's better than Ananta Seish. Many peaks of Govardhan here are compared to the many hoods of Ananta Seish. Ananta Seish holds Vishnu in his lap, right, as a support, a bedstead, if you will. But Govardhan becomes the playground for Radha and Krishna's pastimes. He facilitates those leelas. And so in speaking like that, she identifies Govardhan with a better than Ananta Seish, who is, of course, an expansion of Baladev, who is the best friend of Krishna, and who is not only the object of love along with Krishna for those in Sakyarasa, but also embodies Sakyarasa itself for Krishna. So Baladev is object of love for Sakyarasa and embodies the ideal of Sakyarasa also. So if we look then at Govardhan through that lens, kind of the Goswami lens, if you will, then we also understand the compatibility between Sakyarasa and Madhurya Rasa. Vatsalya Rasa and Madhurya Rasa are not compatible. Dasya Rasa and Vatsalya Rasa, they're not compatible. Sakyarasa, on the other hand, is compatible with Madhurya Rasa. And in the form of the Narmasakas, the most intimate friends of Krishna, then they are very much essential to the intimacy and union of Radha and Krishna that's so desired within Gaudiya Vaishnavism. If we look at Balaram in Krishna Lila, he cannot directly participate in the Madhurya Rasa, but when he comes as Nityananda Prabhu, he is the biggest advocate of that, although he himself is in Sakyarasa, and persons attracted to him also develop that Sakyarasa. He broadcasted the glorified Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, brought attention to Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and the gift of Madhurya Rasa that he came to share. So he's able to come out all around as Nityananda and actually speak about the virtues and the glories of Madhurya Rasa that he can't do in Krishna Lila itself directly. Point being here that this further serves to illustrate the supporting role, if you will, that Sakyarasa plays in the drama, the Parakiya drama, that is in another sense central to Vrindavan and Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So Sakyarasa is an important and supporting bhava within Gaudiya Vaishnavism that a number of devotees would be influenced by, like my Guru Maharaj, following the lead of Nityananda and his associates, who really started the Sampradaya before the Goswamis had written any books. They were initiating and so forth, and uplifting the downtrodden, particularly the work of Nityananda Prabhu. This is the one of the ways in which we say Nityananda is the best. We can look at ways to say Radha was the best associate, or Advaita, there are different ways to talk about them all, but as far as Nityananda, with a wide scale distribution to the downtrodden and disenfranchised, socially disenfranchised people, like the mercantile community of Saptagram and West Bengal and so forth, that he delivered, whom he was commissioned further and encouraged by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu to remain amongst and deliver. And so it's a very much a supporting role. So Govardhan is very much supporting the intimate Leelas of Radha and Krishna. And if you look at Govardhan and Sakhya-rasa, and you want to extend that to the full measure of Sakhya-rasa, which is Sakhya-rasa influenced by Madhurya, as we call Narma Sakabhav or Priya Narma Sakabhav, then there's nothing that these, according to Rupa Goswami, these Priya Narma Sakas, there's no Leela too intimate for them to participate in. They know about all of them. They're all knowing. All the secrets. And Govardhan is all knowing also. He towers up, so he sees over everything. There's nothing that he misses. So if we worship him, there's no Leela that we'll miss out on. If we want revelation, as intimate as it may be, it can be afforded by Govardhan. He can give everything. So and this reminds me of, I was once objecting to some statements of some followers, Pujapad Sridhar Maharaj, my Siksha Guru, who said that Prabhupada is in Sakhya-rasa, and Sridhar Maharaj had said, of course, and they were repeating that, and they said, if you want Madhurya-rasa, well, that's a problem. You're going to have to find a Madhurya-rasa Guru. I didn't like that very much, although my own affinity is for Sakhya-rasa. And I don't disagree that certainly to have a Madhurya-rasa Siksha Guru would be useful, but the way it was being spoken about, I didn't appreciate it. I brought it up to Pujapad Bhakti Pramod Puri Goswami Maharaj and read Prabhupada's poem on the Jaladuta to him. And he liked it very much. He said, oh, yeah, Sakhya-rasa. And I made that statement. Some people are saying this, that if you have Prabhupada as your guru and you want Sakhya-rasa or Madhurya-rasa, then it's a problem. He said, Bubba, if you think like that if you have a guru like Swami Prabhupada and you think you have a problem, then you have a problem. So he said, and he will make all arrangements, and we see that he did that. He made arrangements to bring, for example, Sridhar Maharaj into the lives of his disciples, who was himself steeped in Madhurya-rasa, and others also of that influence came to give support to some of Prabhupada's disciples who were not finding support in some of the leadership of amongst Prabhupada's own disciples. So we consider that to be Prabhupada's arrangement. But I would look at Govardhan, I hope this helps, Govardhan along these lines, in the way in which Sakhya-rasa is supportive of Madhurya-rasa. There's no friends of Krishna that are more supportive than Subal, Ujjval, Gandharva, and so forth, these type of Narmasakas, who Subal is characterized as risking his entire life, for the sake of the union of Radha and Krishna. So if we look at Govardhan along those lines, I think that may be helpful. Does that help?
Very helpful, Maharaj. So many thanks. Many, many, many thanks to you.
Okay. Thank you for your question.
Okay. Do you want to take what's your feelings about going on with more questions?
Are there more?
We have 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4 more questions.
Yeah, I can answer some more.
Okay. The next question is from Vrajahari. It's in the chat, so I'll have to read it. This is from the Madhura Rastakam, verse 8, which says, his gopas are sweet, his cows are sweet, his staff is sweet, his act of creation is sweet, his defeat of demons is sweet, and his bestowal of fruits is sweet. Everything is sweet about the original Lord of sweetness. And the question is this sweet verse in the mood of Sakya? And how can we understand his act of creation in connection with Sakya Ras?
Where's the verse from?
It is from it's Vallabhacharya in his Sri Madhurya Rastakam.
Well, I'm not an expert on Vallabhacharya, but I can tell you that Vallabhacharya himself was not in Sakyarasa. And if it's Madhurya Rasastakam, then it's fairly obvious that he's speaking from a Madhurya Rasa perspective. Madhurya Rasa is prominent in the Vallabha Sampradaya, as is Vatsalya Rasa. Madhurya Rasa is a little more in the background, an esoteric side of the Vallabha Sampradaya, whereas the face that's prominent and more widely circulated in the Vallabha Sampradaya is that of Vatsalya. The type of Madhurya Rasa there we find is a little different than that which is idealized in Gaudiya Vaishnavism. So I wouldn't think that Vallabhacharya is writing in a mood of Sakyarasa. Now that said, there are prayers that have been written, for example, in Gaudiya Vaishnavism by Acharyas like let's say Rupa Goswami in Madhurya Rasa, in which Sakyarasa is glorified, and even individuals like Subal are glorified by him. Now, in his famous verse of Rupa Goswami, Ujjval Nilmani, is said to be spoken by him in the bhav of Rupa Manjari, in which she is trying to inspire love for Subal in another budding, developing newcomer in Madhurya Rasa, that she may know the position of Subal and how important that is, and to have connection with him in order to participate in Madhurya Rasa. The famous verse where he says there's no seva that Subal doesn't have eligibility for. Just see when a lover of Krishna, Radha, is lying on Krishna, and if she should become upset with him and leave, he goes and brings her back, and he's fanning the couple in this intimacy and so forth. So she marvels at the person of Subal. That's a verse spoken in Madhurya Rasa, but it obviously has its application for Sakyarasa devotees who will say it in glorification of Subal as well. There are other prayers by Rupa Goswami petitioning Subal, for example, bring before the divine couple who you are very best friends of, by your grace, introduce me to them, and so forth. So there are some point being that there are some prayers that are written in the bhava Madhurya Rasa, but still they can apply to Sakyarasa Bhakti. You notice written some prayers like that as well, about aspiration to live in Navadvip, in Godrun, in Gopabhav. It can be interpreted like that. That's more the overt translation of the Bengali, but there's another way of looking at it, where it's an aspiration to see Chaitanya Mahaprabhu enter into Gopa Bhav from a Madhurya Rasa perspective. So all I'm making a large, speaking a lot to say, a small thing is that despite the fact that the poem you cite, the verse that you cite, is written in a Madhurya Rasa Astakam by Vallabhacharya, and in that sense, you could say it doesn't have anything to do with Sakya Rasa. It still could be used. It could be voiced in Sakya Rasa or in pursuit of Sakya Rasa as well. As to the question about creation, sweet is his creation. There's a couple of ways that could be looked at. It's not a verse I'm familiar with, and I haven't studied the whole Astakam, but just on its face, then of course creation immediately makes us think of the world creation, which is said in the sutras to be lokavattu lila kaivalyam. It's something that develops only out of lila, out of a play of God, not out of any necessity on his part, so on and so forth. And now when we think of the material world, we think, well, what does that have to do with Krishna Lila? It actually has a lot to do with Krishna Lila. So if we want to look at it as sweet in connection with all of those things that are mentioned as sweet, that are so internal, how does this apparently external thing fit in? Well, it's thought that Krishna Lila, being human-like from the Gaudiya perspective, is able to play itself out with greater sweetness in the material creation, because it's a human-like pastime, or Lila, and when it's played out in human society, well, it's like a movie that's said to be better or enhanced by the fact that it is filmed on location, rather than making props and making it look like human society. It actually is human society, with all of its centered on its strength and its simultaneous weakness. The strength of humanity is its love, and that's its weakness. That's its greatest weakness at the same time. So Krishna enters the world of his creation to engage in his prakat lila, and there's a certain sweetness there that is added to it, just like, for example, the birth of Krishna. Well, that takes place in the prakat lila, largely, right? So, from Kavi Karnapur's perspective, in his Ananda Vrindavan Champa, he says the lila is there just so that Mother Soda could actually experience the birth of Krishna. From his perspective, the birth doesn't take place in the prakat lila. Others have different perspectives on that, but that's a way of thinking about it. And overall, the human society humans are central to the creation of the world. It's the focus of people in hell and the people in heaven too, on earth. It's got a little bit of both, right? So actually, within the creation, it's a very earth-centric perspective, and Krishna's thought to appear on earth to play out his pastimes, in which becomes sweeter. That's one way of thinking about that. Another way, of course, is the Vrindavan is also his creation, and it's very sweet. And therefore, the Bhagavatam uses those exact words. It says, what is the verse? It's another creation. This Bhagavatam, which is about Vrindavan ultimately, is another creation altogether. So you can look at it like that as well. I hope that very long answer helps. Forgive me for being too wordy. Another question?
Krishnadas, you want to unmute yourself and ask your question?
Dandavat pranams. Good morning, Guru Maharaj.
Good morning, Krishnadas.
So my question is, let's see. So recently I was having a conversation with a friend who was curious to learn more about Gaudiya Vaishnavism, and we were talking in particular about how Gaudiya Vaishnava theology addresses the philosophical problem of evil or suffering. However, there was one thing that came up that I had a little bit of difficulty answering to my friend's satisfaction regarding how karma is simultaneously both a law that dispenses just results for one's actions in due time and teaches one to ultimately rectify their character and learn from their mistakes. So the question ultimately boiled down to, why do the vast majority of living entities not remember their past lives and actions done therein, if the ultimate purpose of the karmic reactions they receive beyond just dispensing justice is to have them learn from their past actions? So I brought up some points to them about how it's in a way merciful that one doesn't remember everything, and how cumbersome and potentially traumatic it could be to be weighed down with memories of effectively infinite lifetimes worth of actions. But I was wondering what your thoughts are on this topic of karma as both a force of justice and rectification, and how you would answer the question.
Well, I think that you can't expect to be in knowledge when you're absorbed in pursuing ignorance. So ignorance is attachment to the ephemeral on the part of an eternal, right? And that in pursuit of enduring and happy life. So to be attached to things that don't endure and pursue happiness in an enduring sense in relation to them is ignorance. And that's what material life is. So when you're pursuing the ignorance, how can you expect to be in knowledge at the same time? So you're not going to be in knowledge. But in human life, you get the opportunity to hear from sadhus about what constitutes repercussions from previous actions, that is your karma. And you can see that there are consequences for actions that we take. So there's an explanation of that given by the scriptures from the Vedanta point of view, from sadhus and so forth. They give the knowledge. They tell us. Then once we have that knowledge from them, then we can see also in this life how the things happen to us, and we can learn from them. We can look at it, as you say, as a learning, experience. Oh, this is happening to me because of my karma, and I'm learning from it. But without that knowledge from sadhus, it's very difficult or it's unreasonable to expect that you would have a knowing when what you're experiencing is the direct result of being absorbed in unknowing, in ignorance. So you can't get knowledge out of ignorance. Ignorance is what karma is. So I don't think it's exactly as you may have been thinking about it. That, well, here's the punishment so that you can learn from it, and built into the punishment, it's just like if I say to my child, okay, now you did this, therefore I am taking away your allowance. This is the punishment for what you did. Now you can understand that as you experience the punishment, you can understand that it's a consequence of this action. This action is bad, so you can learn. Well, it doesn't exactly work like that. That's kind of how you're thinking about it. Because again, why don't we remember our past lives? Well, because of the way we conduct ourselves in this life and in the previous lives. We can't expect to remember the past lives would be to be in knowledge of them. How can we expect to be in knowledge of them when we're in direct pursuit of abject ignorance? But in human life, we get a chance for sadhu sangha and so forth, and we can learn these things theoretically, and some of them will appear to be empirically true, or there's empirical evidence for them. There's a way, in other words, like attachment to things is the womb from which suffering is born. Well, you can test that, and see. My attachment, I don't have it, I want it, it's giving me anxiety. I have it, I feel I might lose it, it's giving me anxiety. Or I do lose it, now it's giving me anxiety. So it's verifiable. Some of the things that we're taught. We're taught an angle of vision that we didn't, what was not our vantage point previously. And so the value of sadhu sangha. Now, once you have that again, then what you're talking about applies a little bit more. You can see in this life, well, I did this, and see, therefore I got that reaction, or if I do this, I'll get that reaction. Therefore, I won't do it. I think that's how I would look at it. Does that help?
Yes. Thank you very much, Guru Maharaj. Hare Krishna.
You can't expect to be in knowledge when you're pursuing ignorance. The two don't go together. All right. So I think, are there any other questions?
We have a question from Kishore. He has it written. Okay, and the chat also, I'll read it to you. Nityananda Prabhu is said to purchase those who worship Gaur. Ye Jan Gauranga Bhaje Se Amara Prana Ye. Right. Can we think of those who have an affinity for Sakya Ras as devotees who are purchased by Nityananda in a special way?
Yeah, definitely. And you're lucky for that. One who hears that prayer thinks, wow, be purchased by him. That would be extraordinary. Right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yes, I would say I have a short answer to that, and that is yes. A good way to think. So, all right, we've gone a little bit over half hour. I think I'll stop for now, and hopefully we can connect next week, and hopefully we'll have our internet up and working. So,
wonderful.
Appreciate your questions, time, and interest. Thank you all very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai.
Jai.
Gaur Bhaktivedanta ki jai. Gaur Premanande.
Haribo.
Haribo.